Lisa Maria Kaisa was born in 1994 in a large family where her 8 siblings also grew up. It was a large but far from prosperous family. Parents were busy with their own problems and did not show love and care towards their children. Moreover, there were rumors that abuse and violence were rampant in the family. The story in question unfolded in the year 2020, at the very time when the whole world was consumed with the fight against COVID-19. In one corner of Ecuador, quietly and unnoticed, truly terrible events were unfolding. Here in the small parish of Pifo on the northeastern outskirts of Quito, the protagonist of this tragic story was born and raised. Lisa Maria Kaisa, a woman with an enigmatic gaze whose life story became a true Ecuadorian nightmare. On that unfortunate Tuesday, October 27, 2020, Lisa sent several messages to the father of her children, David. They were words full of despair because their paths with David at that time had already almost parted. In these lines, she confessed her love for him and her unexpected new pregnancy. However, in subsequent messages, Lisa wrote that life was losing its meaning for her, and the decision to terminate the pregnancy was inevitable. Throughout the night, Lisa pleaded with David to come to her, but his refusal was resolute. His parents also urged him to stay home, and David took their advice. In the early morning hours of October 28th, neighbors in Lisa's home heard a faint cry for help. Looking out the window, they found a woman lying on the floor with signs of vomiting. The neighbors rushed to help her, immediately calling emergency services. The doctors and police arrived and found Lisa in a critical condition, but still alive. After administering first aid, she was immediately hospitalized. However, in the house, her children, a girl of 5 and a boy of 9, were found unconscious. The doctors were unable to help them. Their little hearts had stopped beating at that point. Authorities learned the identity of the children's father and contacted David Acosta, who upon learning of the tragedy immediately arrived on the scene accompanied by his father. He was informed that Lisa was in the hospital, and his children were found without signs of life. After several days of fighting for life in the hospital, Lisa finally regained consciousness. By that time, the investigators, guided by their findings, had presented the prosecutor's office with sufficiently convincing arguments to issue an arrest warrant for this mysterious woman. When she was released from the hospital, she was immediately transferred to a social rehabilitation center. The authorities insisted that Lisa undergo a psychological and psychiatric evaluation as her state of mind required further investigation as part of the upcoming trial. Lisa ended up in a rehabilitation center, and doctors and psychologists took up their work. In a conversation with a criminal psychologist, Lisa opened up about her difficult childhood where her parents fought and abused each other and their children. Her childhood had a noticeable impact on her state of mind, and moments of quarrels and her parents' divorce became an integral part of her memories. Such a childhood forced Lisa to go to work from the age of 11 to be able to study. The girl strived to escape from her dysfunctional family and build her future in a different way. The future in a different way. The expert report also indicated that Lisa had been abused. She talked about how, after several years of marriage, David, her husband, changed dramatically. He began to humiliate his spouse and then to raise his hand against her. He began to humiliate his spouse and then to raise his hand against her. On the day of the tragedy with the children, investigators working at the scene found several glasses with liquid residue on the table. These finds later revealed traces of epilepsy pills belonging to one of the children, as well as other chemicals requiring identification. Police officers thoroughly searched the house, and after noticing a strange odor in the kitchen, noticed a suspicious area under the utility room. They broke down the barrier and found a lifeless body wrapped in a blanket with characteristic signs of having been there for a long time. Later, further investigation revealed that the discovered body belonged to Jamie Yanchiguano, a 28-year-old who had been in contact with Lisa. Jamie had been reported missing by his family days before the gruesome discovery. According to Rosa Yanchiguano, Jamie's sister, he was last seen on October 18th. Rosa told investigators that after her brother disappeared, Lisa called several times inquiring about him. Lisa claimed to have received a text message from Jamie where he mentioned that illegal substance traffickers were holding him captive and demanding a ransom of $8,000. She strongly warned Jamie's family not to contact the police. This claim became a crucial point in a complex investigation as detectives sought to solve the tragedy and uncover if there were any other hidden victims. During her interrogation, Lisa revealed that in 2020, while working at a cookie factory, she met Jamie Iansaguano. According to her, they became friends. Lisa wanted to return to her husband, who allegedly planned to blackmail Jamie for money. David made it clear to Lisa that if she did not help him, he would divorce her. Later, David gave Lisa a white powder and told her to put it in Zayame's food. Once she did, Zayame fell asleep and never woke up. Realizing what had happened, Lisa, in desperation, tried to win back her husband, but failed. In her despair, she ingested the same poison and gave it to her children. However, the poison did not have the expected effect on her, and she sought help from her neighbors to save herself from the horror that had befallen her children. Following her testimony, investigators launched a thorough investigation, but no evidence of David's involvement was found. No one close to the couple could have foreseen that Lisa Maria and David Acosta's lives would take such a tragic turn. When they met, Lisa was only 16 years old and still in high school, a dreamy and romantic girl, while David was a strong and determined young man. Their friendship quickly developed into strong feelings, leading to Lisa's unexpected pregnancy. Although their families disapproved of their relationship, David's parents supported their son and welcomed Lisa into their home. In difficult times, David's family provided genuine support to the young couple, even inviting Lisa to live with them to ensure she completed high school. When Lisa turned 18, the couple got married. 2 years later, they were expecting their second child, a daughter. David's parents decided to provide the young couple with their own home, giving them an apartment where they found a corner of family happiness. However, over time, their relationship began to deteriorate. Both spouses were unfaithful, leading to mistrust and disappointment. Their once boundless love began to weaken. Lisa also complained of psychological abuse from David, prompting her to seek help from the police. Eventually, she was granted a protective order, forcing David to leave the family home. At this point, Lisa began to blackmail David, demanding money for the chance to see their children. In early September 2020, Lisa's life took an unexpected turn when her eldest son began suffering from seizures. In desperation, she took him to the emergency room at Baca Ortiz Hospital. After stabilizing his condition, doctors conducted tests and diagnosed a focal form of epilepsy, a severe condition affecting a specific part of the brain. Doctors advised Lisa to undergo further tests, including MRIs, and to consult specialists urgently. However, Lisa ignored these recommendations. A month later, her son suffered another seizure, and they returned to the emergency room. Reviewing his medical history, doctors discovered Lisa had not followed their earlier advice, failed to complete tests, and had not seen specialists, leaving her son without necessary treatment. They warned her that continued neglect could lead to legal consequences. Despite the warnings, Lisa disregarded the medical advice. A few weeks later, after her son's condition resurfaced, she called David, who was alarmed by her serious tone. She informed him that a social worker would visit to discuss. To brighten the waiting time, Lisa offered him a drink. However, as David drank the drink, he suddenly felt unwell. His condition was worsening, and the social worker had not shown up. So David decided to go home to get something to deal with his discomfort. The next morning, David woke up in a terrible state. He could barely speak because his tongue was numb. Every step caused discomfort, and his eyes hurt. His parents insisted on calling an ambulance. David was taken to the hospital where he spent several days. Tests revealed the presence of a psychoactive substance in his system. But given that he hadn't used anything of the sort, David began to speculate how this could have happened. Eventually, he speculated that perhaps someone had deliberately slipped him some substance in a public place. David was grateful for his life and realized that what had happened could have ended much worse. In early October 2020, Lisa made the decision to hire a nanny for her children. Her cousin Patricia recommended her friend Bertha, a responsible 48-year-old woman looking for work. On Monday, October 5th, Bertha arrived at the young mother's house. Lissa urged her to take a pill that she said helped prevent infection with the COVID-19 virus, an epidemic of which was at its height at the time. Claiming that it was a highly effective natural remedy, Lissa convinced Bertha to swallow the medicine and enter the house. They sat down to discuss the babysitter's childcare duties. A few minutes later, Bertha began to feel sick. She felt a headache. Her stomach began to upset, and eventually, she vomited. A short while later, Patricia showed up. It turned out that she had called her cousin repeatedly, but Lissa didn't answer, which alerted Patricia. She decided to check what had happened and immediately went to her house. Upon entering, she found Bertha lying on the couch who was practically fainting already. Lissa shared with her cousin what had happened and expressed concern. Learning that Lissa still had not called an ambulance, Patricia immediately did so herself. After a while, doctors arrived and sent Bertha to the hospital. The condition of the victim managed to stabilize. Doctors diagnosed poisoning with a toxic substance, which often happens when using various medications. Doctors decided that Bertha did not tolerate some component of the composition of the pills from COVID-19. A few months before this tragic incident, in June of the same year, Lissa's former buddy, Mark Escanto, had died of poisoning. At the time, the cause of his death had gone unnoticed. But now, given all these strange circumstances, Mark's case required additional attention. Investigators scrutinized the deceased's home and found Lissa's fingerprints on the glasses used the night before Mark's death. This fact added new evidence to the investigation, pointing to Lissa's possible involvement in the incident. But suddenly, a new accusation was made against Lissa. Her own family made a shocking report to the police. It turns out that on September 2nd, the family had a family gathering where Lissa offered to let everyone taste a drink of her own making. 7 brothers and sisters of the young woman, as well as their parents, drank the unknown drink and immediately felt sick. Fortunately, no one died, but the 56-year-old mother suffered a stroke. Lissa's father claimed that while the relatives were seeking medical attention, his daughter stole $1,300 from the house. Now the investigation included not only crimes against the children and a former boyfriend, but also an incident that jeopardized the lives and health of her own family members. As it turned out, that wasn't all. Investigators encountered another strange event. In May of that year, Jose Luis Herezo, a friend of Lissa's, was found dead in his home. A few days before, Jose had suddenly disappeared, and neighbors soon smelled a rotting odor, prompting them to contact the authorities. An examination of the body initially revealed nothing suspicious and was ruled a heart attack. But one of Jose's sisters suspected something strange and hid a bottle of alcohol found in the refrigerator. In addition, Jose's family noticed that some items were missing from the house. Turned out that Lissa and Jose were friends. And when the guy died, the alleged killer contacted his relatives by phone. With a distraught voice, she stated that Jose owed her a large sum of money, and she had to contact the family to repay the debt. This cunning plan did not work, and a little later, Lissa called Jose's family again, changing her voice to conceal her identity. Identifying herself as Jose's friend, she claimed that she was pregnant by him and now had to apply for child support. Although Jose's family did not believe these stories, Lissa was not about to give up and made a third attempt to deceive them. She said she knew who was responsible for Jose's death and offered to meet to uncover the details. Had she not been arrested on charges of killing her own children in Jamie, the list of victims might have gotten longer. When the media reported the arrest of Lissa, who had poisoned 3 people, Jose's relatives understood. They immediately reported their suspicions to the authorities, and Jose's body was exhumed for forensic examination to determine the true cause of death. The relatives were not mistaken. Traces of poison were found in the remains of the deceased. On December 22, 2020, a hearing was held for Lisa Maria Kaisa for the murder of her 2 children, whose names and photos were classified, and for Jamie Ianchiguano. The trial was conducted virtually due to restrictions related to the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Lissa had been in contact from a social rehabilitation center. The prosecutor's statement said that Lissa gave her children a toxic mixture of insecticides and anti-epileptic drugs. In interrogations, she claimed that she had grown desperate and could not leave her children with her husband David, who did not care for the children. In fact, she admitted that she wished them dead. At the end of the hearing, the judge issued the defendant a court pass and ordered her remanded into custody pending trial. The children's trial next took place in 2021 at the Pichincha Provincial Court. The prosecutor presented a set of evidence to prove Lissa's guilt. Among them were statements by David, who revealed the content of messages the wife had received on the eve of the tragedy. In one of the messages, she claimed that she would take with her what belonged to her, referring to the children. She said she didn't know where her children and herself would go, heaven or hell. But now she felt as if she was in hell. Lissa added that she doesn't expect her husband to forgive her because she knows he hated her, and now he will hate her even more. David also spoke about his unstable relationship with his wife. At the hearing, the defendant's reconstructed testimony was presented stating that she took 2 pills that day, called for help, and then passed out. According to the reconstruction conducted by the prosecutor's office, the daughter died while still in bed, and her older brother tried to take a few steps to call for help, but fell and died. The conclusion of the forensic medical examination was extremely clear, that the children died as a result of a premeditated crime. The deaths were the result of suffocation caused by pulmonary edema and intoxication caused by a mixture of epilepsy medication and other unspecified substances, presumably insecticides and disinfectant. The prosecution also charged Lissa with the death of Jamie Ianchiguano, whose body was found bricked up in the kitchen. The perpetrator was also suspected of attempting to kill David and members of her own family. The hearing raised the issue of Lissa's irresponsible attitude to her son's health after being diagnosed with localized epilepsy. The mother ignored instructions for further tests and follow-up examinations. And when the boy was hospitalized again, his condition was exacerbated by her own mother's negligence. Warnings from medical professionals did not change her attitude toward her son's treatment, leading to a threatened termination of her parental rights. Lissa's mental health investigations revealed her to be highly emotional and environmentally dependent. She sought constant attention and understanding from others and experienced severe anxiety when events did not unfold according to her plan. She also exhibited a tendency to self-harm. She attempted to say goodbye to her life at least 3 times, but was unsuccessful each time. Witnesses described her as insecure, attachment-seeking, exhibiting schizoid and erratic behavior. The findings of the psychological analysis also emphasized that on the day of the tragic events, Lissa acted with full awareness of her actions. After a long trial that lasted 10 months, Lisa Maria Kaisa was found guilty of the crime against her children. The Pichincha Provincial Court sentenced her to 34 years and 8 months imprisonment. In addition to this, she was ordered to pay David a compensation of more than $20,000. It was noted in the press that Lisa remained calm throughout the proceedings and only showed emotion when her children were mentioned. The Jamie Ianchiguano murder case, which began in August 2021, appeared to be unfinished. New details were revealed during the court hearings. Lissa admitted giving her friend a white substance mixed with alcohol, but claimed she got it from David. However, the investigation proved otherwise. According to a psychiatrist who interviewed Lissa, she did not want to take Jaim's life. She wanted to intimidate his family so she could then extort money. She did demand $8,000 as ransom. Experts called the plan disorganized, which ultimately led to the crime. In addition, forensic tests revealed that it wasn't that simple. Jamie was found to have poison in his system, and the cause of death was strangulation. The body was found with a shattered rib cage and wire around the neck. Lissa claimed that after her friend died, she decided to bury him under a back room and cement him in. The store owner's testimony confirmed that Lissa bought building materials during the days of Jamie's disappearance. After the parties' arguments, the prosecutor's office requested a new trial in April 2022. At that trial, an additional charge of extortion was filed. Lissa called Jamie's relatives, claiming he was being held by a group of gangsters and demanded $8,000 for his release. The defense relied on the lack of conclusive evidence that Lissa was involved in Himi's murder. Nevertheless, she was found guilty and received a 22-year prison sentence, as well as a sentence to pay $5,000 to the victim's mother. While Jamie's trial was underway, the investigation of Mark Escanto and Jose Luis Arrezo, Lisa's alleged victims, was nearing completion. Mark Escanto was 48 years old, and tests conducted after his death revealed traces of the same substance that Lisa had given to her children. In addition, Mark was found to have severe inflammation of the stomach. The family's lawyer claimed that Lisa met Mark, offered him a beer, and then put the poison in the drink. A glass with Lisa and Mark's fingerprints, as well as a swab containing the woman's DNA, was provided to authorities. Alleged motives for the murder included jealousy and money. It is also known that Lisa had asked Mark to help her financially, and there is evidence that he loaned her at least $120. Mark was Lisa's first known victim. The final outcome of this case, as well as that of Jose Luis Arrezo, remain unknown. They may not have been reported in the press, or the investigation may not yet have reached the stage of being formally charged and brought to trial. At the time of her brutal crimes, Lisa Maria was only 26 years old. Her high-profile criminal case has become one of the most horrific and disturbing in Ecuador's recent history. These crimes made her known throughout the country as Dona Venado. Lisa Maria Kaisi is recognized as a serial killer in Ecuador. Her victims have endured terrible suffering, and their relatives have suffered unbearable pain. The charges include 5 murders and 9 attempted murders. Under Ecuadorian law, the maximum sentence she could face is 40 years in prison. That means Alyssa could be released when she turns 70 years old. It is still unclear what motivated Dona Venado to commit such horrific acts. Was her act the result of resentment for not getting what she expected in life? Many speculate that the motive was money, and in David's case, Lisa acted out of a lust for revenge, which led to the tragedy with her children. The most horrific part of this story is not only the number of victims left in the path of Dona Venado, but also the fate of 2 innocent children who could not have guessed that their mother, who gave them life, would take it away so absurdly and cruelly. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to our new channel, where we uncover captivating and chilling cold cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. You won't want to miss the twists and turns we have in store. Let's continue. Every relationship of a person is based on the pillar of trust, whether it's between parents and children, husband and wife, or even between boyfriend and girlfriend. But if someone breaks the trust of another person in these essential relationships and starts thinking badly about them, it feels really terrible. And today's case is somewhat similar, where a boy and a girl from Pakistan were very happy in their relationship. But then after some time, the girl breaks up because she started seeing a dog's side of her boyfriend. But then what the boy did with his girlfriend shook the entire Pakistan. Shaukat Ali Makadam was not only a normal citizen of Pakistan, but also a diplomat and ambassador of Pakistan. Due to this, he had to live in different countries. However, in 2021, he was living in Islamabad, Pakistan. Apart from this, at one point, Shaukat Ali had also been Pakistan's ambassador to South Korea and Kazakhstan. Because of this, he held a very high position in Pakistan. There were a total of 5 people in his family, including Shaukat Makadam, his wife Kausar Makadam, 2 daughters, and 1 son. October 23, 1993 was the day when a beautiful girl was born in Shaukat Ali's house, whom they named Nur. Nur was a healthy and cute baby who always laughed and never bothered anyone too much. Although Shelchat's professional life was very busy and stressful, but when he came home, he spent quality time with his family. As a result, his children had a very good upbringing. From school days, Nur had a great interest in studying. She always used to read either school books or other books. Now, because Shaukat Makadam was a diplomat, he used to get transferred to other countries due to his work, which is why Nur started her schooling from Ireland. Then she completed high school from South Korea. After South Korea, the family moved to Kazakhstan. But Nora thinks about completing her college in the US, where her older sister Sarah also lived. However, after the US, Nora returned to Pakistan, Islamabad. As humble and smart as Nur was in her childhood, she was equally humble and smart in her adult years. That's why everyone at home trusted Nur and easily accepted her decisions. Besides, Nur loved animals, especially stray dogs and cats. She used to feed them whenever she had time. Although Nur belonged to a wealthy family, she never had a liking for materialistic things. By hearing all these things, you must have understood that Nur was a kind-hearted, down-to-earth, intelligent, and confident girl. Along with all these things, Nur also had a great passion for art and calligraphy. She often made religious paintings too. As I mentioned, coming from a wealthy diplomat family, parties were a common occurrence at the diplomats' homes. So Shelkat McAdam often took his family to such parties because they were excellent for networking and building connections. It was at one such party in 2018 that Nur met a boy named Zahir Jaffer. Zahir and Nur are both going to be key characters in this case. So before we proceed, let's take a brief look at Zahir's background. Zahir Jaffer was born in the USA, but he spent his childhood and teenage years in Pakistan. After that, Zahir pursued his graduation in the US and also spent some time living in the UK. Zahir's father was Zahir Jaffer, who was a very successful businessman. Due to his father's business ventures, the Jaffer family was one of the wealthiest families in Pakistan. The Jaffer family had various businesses including healthcare, oil, real estate, and construction. This also provided them with opportunities to work with their country's military. One of these companies is Ahmed Jaffer and Company, where Zahir Jaffer is now the CEO while his father, Zahir Jaffer, used to oversee the company. But after some time, Zahir's mood changed, and he started working as a therapist at a company called Therapy Works. In this company, Zahir used to listen to the children of the school and explain to them about mental health care. He also used to arrange lectures and presentations for the children. But the shocking thing here is that Zahir himself wasn't introverted and angry since childhood. He also had very few friends, and he rarely attended parties with them. But it is at one such party that he meets Nur, and he likes her. And Nur also enjoys talking to Zahir. Perhaps this happened because their personalities were different, and people say that opposite personalities are attracted to each other. However, both their families already knew each other because they used to attend such parties. But friendship between Nur and Zahir developed from this party. Then, after some time, this friendship turned into love and they both entered into a romantic relationship. However, it's not like they kept this fact hidden from their parents or friends. Rather, both their families and friends knew that Zahir and Nur were dating. Both families were happy because Nur completes Zahir and Zahir completes Nur. Actually, Nur brought out a side of Zahir that no one had seen before, whereas Zahir used to be very introverted before. But as soon as he met Nur, his personality began to change gradually. He started enjoying his life, hanging out with people. And at one party, people were surprised to see Zahir dancing with Nur, including Zahir's family, because they had never thought they would see this side of Zahir's personality. Everything was going well, but as the relationship grew older, things started to deteriorate. Initially, everything was going well in the relationship. Both were enjoying themselves and their families were also very happy. But then after some time, a different side of Zahir came out in front of Nur. Actually, Nur later finds out that Zahir is a very aggressive and abusive man. Allegedly, Zahir had physically and mentally abused Nur several times. Not only that, Zahir had also raised his hand against his own mother before. As a result, after almost 3 years of relationship, when Nur couldn't bear Zahir anymore, she broke up with him at the beginning of 2021. In both families, there was dissatisfaction over their children ending the relationship. Because neither of them was a normal family, and in such affluent households, it's not typical for a boy and a girl to enter a relationship, break up shortly after, and then enter into a relationship with someone else later. In fact, people like them also see relationships as a business. Like most wealthy families, they marry off their sons or daughters where they can profit. But besides that, Zahir was also displeased that Nur left him, and now he took it as an affront to his male ego. However, after some time, Zahir also started thinking about moving on, and then he thought he would go back to the US and settle there because he also had US citizenship along with Pakistani citizenship. Now let's jump to July 18th, 2021. On this day, Zahir booked a taxi to go to Islamabad International Airport. Actually, according to Pakistan Standard Time, Zahir's flight to New York was at 3:50 a.m. on July 19th. He had already packed his bags and informed his family about it. But before leaving, he wanted to meet Nur just once, so he called Nur on the evening of July 18th. At that time, Nur was at her home preparing for Eid with her family. Now Zahir called Nur and requested, "I am leaving this country for New York, and I will never come back here again. But I will settle in the US, so please meet me once before I leave." Additionally, Zahir told Nur, "Come to my house. We'll meet, and then when I leave for the airport from my house, I'll drop you off at your home first." Although these two had already broken up, before that they had been in a relationship for 3 years, which led Nur to say yes to meeting Zahir. After that, at 9:05 p.m., Nur leaves her house. But she doesn't tell her family that she's going to Zahir's house. She just says she's going to her friend's house and will be back soon. Around 10 p.m., Nur arrives outside Zahir's house at the scent location in Sector F-74. But strange things start happening from here. Now, as I told you, Zahir's flight was at 3:50 a.m., but between 10 and 11 p.m., Zahir calls his travel agency multiple times. Zahir called his travel agency and started asking them very strange questions like, "What would happen if I don't board this flight? Will I get my refund back? If I decide to book tickets again after 10 days, what will happen?" Sometime later, Zahir called his travel agency again and said that now I'm not canceling my ticket, but I've decided to go to the US on this flight. But let me tell you, during this time, Nur was inside his house with him. But for her, this house was a new place because she had never been here before. Afterward, the taxi that Zahir had booked to go to the airport also arrives outside Jaffer's house at exactly 11 p.m. However, Zahir doesn't come out of the house for half an hour. Meanwhile, the taxi driver called Zahir 2 or 3 times, but Zahir told him to wait, saying, "I'll be there in just 5 minutes. However, at 12:07 a.m., he calls the taxi driver again and says, "My plan to go to the airport is canceled now. Anyway, if we leave for the airport now, I won't be able to catch my flight." Despite waiting for more than an hour, Zahir pays the taxi driver half the fare. Actually, Zahir had booked this taxi for 2,000 Pakistani rupees. Now after that, the taxi driver leaves from there. But at 1:40 a.m., Zahir calls the taxi driver again and asks him to come back to his house. Now the taxi driver also returns to Zahir's house because he knew he would get the full payment. But this time too, Zahir made the taxi driver wait outside the house for a few minutes. And then at 2:15 a.m., Zahir comes out with his luggage. But the strange thing this time was that Nur was also with him, and she didn't have sandals on her feet, which the driver found very strange. However, what struck him as even strange was that Zahir was talking to Nur during the car ride, but Nur wasn't responding to his words. Although the driver didn't pay much attention to this at the time, halfway through, Zahir told the driver, "Now take the car back towards home anyway. We're already very late. I don't think we'll make it to the airport on time and catch the flight." After that, the taxi driver drops them off again at Jaffer's house at 2:35 a.m. But as soon as Nur got out of the taxi, Zahir pulled her inside the house. According to the taxi driver's statement, he felt like Nur wasn't supposed to go back inside the house with Zahir, but Zahir forcefully took her inside. Then on July 19th, Nur stayed at Zahir's house the whole day, and then July 20th arrived, which was the day of Eid. Nur had come to Zahir's house to meet him on July 18th at 9:05 p.m. But now it had been more than 24 hours, and Nur's father and mother had returned home after shopping for Eid. But when they find out that their daughter has been missing from home for 24 hours, at 12:57 a.m. on July 20th, Shaukat McAdam texts his daughter asking her where she is. However, Nur doesn't reply to that text message. Then at 5:48 a.m., Nur's mother messages her, and 2 family friends also call Nur, yet there is no response from Nur. This causes worry for Nur's parents, and they were about to inform the police about it. But at 10:43 a.m., Nur sends a voice recording to her mother. However, the contents of that recording were never made public, but it was the last time Nur's mother, Kosar McAdam, heard her daughter's voice. But after sending the voice message, another strange thing happens. Zahir immediately calls Nur's mother from his own phone and tells her that Nur is not at his house, trying to prove that he hasn't even seen Nur. Then from 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. that same day, Zahir repeatedly calls his father Zakir Jaffer. However, at around 7:10 p.m., Nur is seen on CCTV cameras. But by that time, her condition was very bad, and it seemed as though Zahir had tortured her severely. In the CCTV footage, Nur is seen jumping from the balcony of Zahir's house on the first floor and falling directly onto an iron grill. This caused her to sustain an injury to her abdomen, which is why she is seen holding her stomach in this clip. She was actually distressed by Zahir's harassment and wanted to leave the house. However, the security guard closed the gate, and meanwhile, Zahir also jumps from the balcony to catch Nur and brings her back inside. But as he was bringing her back, Nur falls down, but Zahir drags her inside. Now, I should tell you that it wasn't just Zahir and Nur inside the house. There was also a security guard, a cook, and a gardener, but none of them helped Nur. In fact, from July 18th to July 20th, Nur attempted to escape from this house 6 times. But each time, one of Zahir's servants informed him, and Nur was always caught. But this time, because of Nur's attempt to escape, Zahir becomes very angry. After bringing Nur back inside, he calls his father once again around 7:30 p.m. But since then, Zahir didn't call anyone for 30 minutes because in the meantime, Zahir first attempts to shoot Nur with his handgun. But as soon as he presses the trigger, his gun jams. However, even after that, Zahir doesn't stop wanting to kill Nur. It was already in his mind. So he takes out a Swiss knife and starts stabbing every part of Nur's body. Meanwhile, Nur scratches Zahir's face and arms with her nails. But after some time, Nur's condition deteriorates so much that she faints. Nur was unconscious, but even then, Zahir kept stabbing her with the knife. Afterward, he grabs Nur by the throat and keeps squeezing until Nur's last breath is gone. Later, Nur's post-mortem report reveals that she died due to lack of oxygen. But before killing Nur, Zahir ripped her several times. But Zahir didn't stop there. After Nur's death, he pulled out his knife and started cutting Nur's throat. And finally, he severed her head from her body. After killing Nur, Zahir quickly calls his father and friends saying, "Thieves have broken into our house, and I need help." At the same time, some of Zahir's friends head towards his house. However, Zahir's father wasn't there. That's why he called the CEO of the company where Zahir worked, named Therapy Works, and said, "Quickly go to my house and save my son at any cost." In reality, Zahir's father, Zakir Jaffer, called the CEO of that company because they needed to erase all evidence of Nur's murder by going to Zahir. Moreover, the CEO of the company had to comply because Zahir's father was funding the company. Around 8:30 p.m., Tahir Zohar, the CEO of Therapy Works, arrives outside Zahir's house with his 6 employees. Additionally, some of Zahir's friends were also present. However, the door of Zahir's house remained closed, so Tahir took a ladder and, with his employees, entered through the window on the first floor. But as soon as they reached the first floor, Zahir attacked one of the employees with a knife, piercing through his chin and tongue. Zahir was extremely angry at that moment, so 5 to 6 people quickly grabbed him to control him. After this, Zahir's hands were tied behind his back, and ropes were also tied around his feet. But as soon as the people went inside Zahir's room from the balcony, they were stunned. In fact, there was blood everywhere on the floor, even on the walls of the room. Then they saw Nur's body in the center of the room, but her head was 3 feet away from her body. Now everyone inside the room was astonished to regain control over Zahir and after seeing Nur's dead body. But in the meantime, the neighbors were also quite alert because when Zahir was being caught, he was screaming a lot, which made his neighbors call the police. After that, the police arrived there, and then on July 20th, around 10 o'clock at night, the police called Kakut Nukdam to inform him that his daughter had been murdered. Hearing this sad news, Nukdam's family home was engulfed in mourning because their youngest and dearest daughter was no longer in this world. But Nur's family knew who had done all this, and now they wanted to punish Zahir according to Pakistan law, meaning the death penalty. After that, the police arrested Zahir, but now they were worried about how Zahir would confess his crime. But Zahir did something very strange here too. As soon as the police caught Zahir, he confessed in a short while that he was the one who had killed Nur, and he had done so because he loved Nur very much. He had even proposed marriage to Nur, but she had rejected his marriage proposal and later broke up with him. This hurt Zahir's ego, so he booked his and Nur's one-way tickets to New York for July 19th. But before this, Zahir had decided that if Nur agreed to go to New York with him, they would get married and settle in New York. But if Nur didn't agree, he would kill her. However, from July, Zahir tried to convince Nur for marriage. But when Nur refused to marry him, Zahir finally assaulted her very brutally. Although all the servants in Zahir's house knew what Zahir did with Nur, none of them tried to stop him even once, not even daring to call the police because they were afraid that if they did, Zahir would not spare them. Now, even though Zahir had confessed his crime in front of the police, when the case went to court, he was behaving strangely in court. Firstly, he entered the court looking disheveled as if he hadn't bathed for days. Besides, he shouted loudly in the courtroom, even abusing the judge. Furthermore, the police had to drag him into the court and out of the court forcefully. However, he was doing all these things to prove that he is mentally unstable. And because of this, he should be spared from the death penalty for the murder of Nur. If it were proven that Zahir is mentally unstable, then firstly, his punishment would be reduced. And secondly, he would escape the death penalty. Actually, Zahir had schizophrenia, and he wanted to take advantage of it by telling the court that he is mentally unfit. Actually, schizophrenia is a serious mental illness in which a person is mostly lost in the world of imagination and knows very little about the real world. Because of this, he often behaves strangely. But when Zahir's medical examination was done, the report clearly stated that Zahir is mentally fit, and whatever he did with Nur, he did it consciously. But this made it clear that Zahir was an abuser and an aggressive person. Besides, there were many harassment cases against Zahir in both the US and Pakistan. In this case, during the ongoing trial in court, the entire Pakistan raised its voice for justice for Nur. Rallies and marches were held every day. As a result, on February 24, 2022, Nur received justice, and Zahir was sentenced to 2 death penalties. One for physically assaulting Nur and the other for her murder. Additionally, his 2 house staff, Iftikhar and Muhammad Khan, were also sentenced to 10 years in jail. Looking at the photos, you wouldn't know much, but Zahir was a powerful, tall, and aggressive man with whom a sweet and innocent girl, Nur, spent almost 48 hours. And those 48 hours were nothing less than hell for her. So with this, the Nur Mercado murder case comes to an end right here. The case of Nancy Paula Reyes Gorces. What led to the crime against the pregnant woman and what became of the child? The quest for personal happiness and a better life can be long, fraught with difficulties, and doesn't always yield the desired outcome. Many people are drawn to other countries or even the other side of the world in these pursuits. But sometimes, instead of finding the expected happiness, they encounter only pain, deep disillusionment, or even death. In the pursuit of dreams and overarching goals, it is crucial to remain aware of the people around us. The story of a young Guatemalan woman named Nancy Paula Reyes Gorces has become one of the most resonant cases in Spain in recent years. The mother of 2 left Central America to cross the ocean in search of employment that could provide her daughters with a decent life and assist her elderly parents. Unrecognizable bodies were found with difficulty in desolate and nearly impassable areas. At the time of her crime, she was 4 months pregnant, and the perpetrator was someone Gorces had hoped to share her life with. Challenging life in Guatemala. Little is known about the early years of the woman named Nancy Paula Reyes Gorces. She was born on April 13, 1991 in a small village named Granados in the Republic of Guatemala. Nancy was the second of 5 children in a very poor family. Her parents, Jorge and Prudencia Gorces, struggled to make ends meet. Despite this, they did everything possible to ensure their children received a good education and could live better than they did. After finishing school, Nancy was able to enroll at the university in the city of Villanueva, where she studied business administration and document management. She was a diligent student and graduated with honors. However, despite her academic achievements, significant career prospects did not follow. She worked as a cashier in a large supermarket during her studies and later was promoted to administrator, but her career progression stalled there. During her university years, Nancy lived in an unregistered marriage with a young man whose name is not mentioned in public records, with whom she had 2 daughters. Unfortunately, this relationship did not lead to a long-term commitment, and the couple separated. The father of the girls subsequently lost interest in the fate of his children and did not provide any financial support. Decision to relocate. Nancy continued to live in her parents' house, now with her own daughters, working at the supermarket and seeing no future prospects. The family barely had successfully and settled well. Inspired by her sister, Nancy decided to radically change her life too, but she chose to relocate to Europe, settling on sunny Spain. At that time, she didn't even have enough money to buy a one-way plane ticket, let alone funds needed for initial expenses. For several years, Gorsis worked diligently, saving enough money to finally make her dream come true in the summer of 2018. In July, she bought a ticket to Madrid and promised her parents that she would keep in constant contact so they wouldn't worry about her. She planned to find housing and a job upon arrival. She carried a few €1,000, enough to rent a room, cover food, and the most necessary items until she could secure a steady income. At the time of her departure, Nancy was 27 years old, and her daughters, who stayed with their grandparents in Guatemala, were 7 and 5 years old. Nancy didn't stay long in Madrid. After living in Barcelona for some time, she moved to the city of Ciudad Real, the center of the Spanish province of the same name. She called home almost daily, asking about her family's well-being, and she regularly sent money home, which increasingly helped her parents not only fully support themselves and her daughters, but also to renovate their old house. Nancy mentioned she didn't have an official stable job and was making ends meet through odd jobs, like cleaning in affluent homes or caring for the elderly and sick. Nancy never complained about the hardships. On the contrary, she told her family that Europe offered more opportunities, and she could never have earned as much back home, even working around the clock with no days off. It seemed she was completely satisfied with how her life was unfolding, and even spoke of eventually bringing her daughters to Spain once she saved enough to rent a spacious and comfortable home for the whole family. Fateful romance. For a while, Nancy didn't share much about her personal life, claiming she simply had no time due to work. But in the spring of 2020, she admitted to her parents that she had met a man with whom she had started a romantic relationship. His name was Carlos Andres Bustamante, and they had met by chance while Gorsis was looking for new rental housing. As they resolved this issue, the couple grew closer and eventually started living together. Carlos was a year older than his beloved and, at the start of their relationship, did not have a steady income, surviving on random small jobs. In fact, Nancy was the main breadwinner in their relationship. She paid for housing and bills and often gave Carlos money for his personal needs and expenses. However, she never complained to her family about this, so her parents were confident that everything was fine, and their daughter had met a good man with whom she lived in love, harmony, and abundance. By that time, Nancy's 2 younger brothers had also moved to Spain with whom she kept in touch. She was particularly close to Dennis, the youngest brother, who had even met Carlos personally and found him likable. At the June 2020, Nancy and Carlos decided to move to the resort city of Santander, located on the Atlantic coast. In a phone conversation with her family, Nancy mentioned that the climate was warmer and better there, and she saw more job prospects. However, at that time, certain difficulties began to appear in her relationship with Carlos, which he tried not to discuss with anyone. Bustamante turned out to be jealous, temperamental, and quite cruel. Moreover, he lacked any career ambitions and was completely satisfied being supported by a woman. Most alarmingly, he abused alcohol and occasionally indulged in forbidden substances, although he constantly tearfully promised to quit and find a stable job. Gorsis was openly doubting whether to continue her life with this man when she discovered she was pregnant. Carlos was thrilled by this news and swore that from now on, their life would change for the better. But in reality, things only got worse. He continued to drink and use drugs, taking money from his civil wife or asking his mother for it. Moreover, he began to physically abuse Nancy, something she tried to keep from everyone. Alarming signals. On the evening of August 12th, while Nancy was video chatting with her parents, they suddenly heard Carlos loudly shouting and berating their daughter, demanding to know who she was talking to. He didn't believe her when she said she was speaking with her mother and snatched the phone from her hands. After verifying the truth by looking at the screen, he simply threw the device onto a chair and walked away. The next day, the situation repeated itself. Carlos again grabbed the phone from Nancy's hands while she was talking to her parents and daughters. He demanded to see who she was speaking with, insulted her, and even threatened harm. A frightened Nancy later explained to her relatives that her partner was just overly jealous and tried to reassure them that everything was fine. Her parents, however, tried to persuade her to contact the police, but she insisted that she could handle the situation herself. However, on August 17th, during a candid phone conversation with her sister, Cortez ominously stated that if anything happened to her or if she suddenly died, Carlos would be solely to blame. Her words were chilling, but she did not elaborate further, only asking her sister to take care of her children if needed. This was the last time her sister heard Nancy's voice. Mysterious disappearance of the pregnant woman. On August 20th around 2 in the afternoon, Nancy sent a text message to her father promising to call later that evening. But she never did, nor the next day, which was unusual for her. She also did not respond to calls from her family, prompting them to try contacting Carlos, but he did not answer his phone either. Since the couple had recently moved to Santander and had no friends there, and Nancy's brothers were on the other side of the country and couldn't quickly arrive to check on her, the situation was alarming. A few days later, a strange message came from Carlos's phone stating that he and Nancy had argued and decided to split up. Allegedly, she had packed her things and left in search of a separate apartment, was ignoring his calls, and he had no idea where she might be. Her brothers then suggested that Carlos should immediately come to Ciudad Real so they could go to the police together and file a missing person report. Carlos readily agreed, but as expected, he never showed up, did not file the report. And on top of everything else, he too stopped communicating with the Gorse family. Mother knew everything. The relatives of the missing woman themselves contacted the police to report her disappearance. Meanwhile, through Nancy's friends, her brothers found the address of Sandra Bustamante, Carlos's mother. When they visited her, introduced themselves, and explained the situation, she unexpectedly broke down in tears, confessing that she had suspected her son could do something terrible to his partner, but she did not elaborate on the details. Sandra also had no idea where her son and future daughter-in-law were. Carlos wasn't answering her calls, but only sent brief messages asking her not to ask questions and to give him some time. She liked Nancy, but knew her son too well and understood what he was capable of. The next day, Sandra was called in for questioning at the police station. Law enforcement wanted to discuss the disappearance of her would-be daughter-in-law and to find out the possible whereabouts of Carlos. She shared with the officers what she had already told the girls' brothers the day before and showed them a lengthy text message that Nancy had sent her a couple of days before she vanished. According to Gorse's, he would spend it all on alcohol and banned substances under the influence of which he became very aggressive and cruel. He had no desire to find a job or battle his addictions, and his behavior became increasingly threatening, prompting the pregnant woman to consider leaving him. She ended her message by saying it was better to end things now before anyone got hurt. Another disturbing detail also came to light. It turned out that Carlos had several prior convictions for causing bodily harm, and one of his first victims had been his own mother, whom he had brutally beaten when he was just a 17-year-old teenager. At that time, he had gotten off with probation. But later, after leaving his family home, he had served short terms for assaulting women with whom he lived and tried to form relationships, the oldest profession. The investigation was just beginning, but in the first few days, many curious details emerged that indicated this union was doomed from the start. In addition to Carlos being an aggressive, unemployed drug addict with a criminal record and suffering from uncontrollable bouts of rage, friends of Nancy revealed something interesting about her as well. It turned out that the woman was not merely a housekeeper or caregiver, as she had told her parents, because cleaning houses and caring for the elderly would never have brought in as much money as she was sending home every month. The slender, dark-haired Guatemalan with a striking appearance provided escort services to wealthy Spaniards and visitors alike. Indeed, her work was connected to the odd and sudden move to the resort port city of Santander, where she had more opportunities to earn. Carlos knew about his beloved's occupation, and initially, he was fine with it since she fully supported them both, eliminating the need for him to find work himself. However, when she became pregnant, he began to lose his mind. Firstly, he was tormented by doubts about whether he was the father of the child, suspecting it might be one of Nancy's clients. Secondly, she continued to work even in her condition, and Bustamante was insanely jealous. He alternated between forbidding her to meet and talk with other men and forcing her to work when they ran out of money to live on. The money that the man took from his mother, he spent exclusively on himself and his vices. Horrific discoveries. In a rented apartment for nearly a week, there had been no known whereabouts of Nancy and Carlos. Carlos had been in touch, but only responded with messages and never disclosed his location. Surprisingly, it wasn't until August 26th that police finally obtained a warrant to search the couple's vacant rental apartment in Santander. What they found there was truly shocking and left no doubt that Nancy was no longer alive. Blood traces were found virtually everywhere in the apartment. Some attempts had been made to clean them up, but for the most part, they were visible even to the naked eye. In the clogged drains of the bathroom and toilet, fragments of bones, hair, as well as pieces of skin and internal organs were discovered. Forensic analysis confirmed that all belonged to the missing woman, although her remains were not found in the apartment. The crime scene suggested that Nancy had been brutally ended, dismembered in the bathroom, and her remains disposed of elsewhere. Carlos immediately became the prime suspect in the case. He remained unreachable, and his whereabouts were unknown. Also found in the apartment was a package from a small hatchet purchased at a local hardware store. The tool itself was not found, but Carlos Bustamante's clear fingerprints were on the package. Security footage from that store showed that on August 20th, Carlos bought the hatchet, a pair of sturdy rubber gloves, and large trash bags. At a market near their home, he purchased a small cart from an elderly vendor who immediately recognized the suspect from a photo shown to him. Arrest and search for the body. The day after the grim discoveries in the apartment, an unsuspecting Carlos unexpectedly turned himself in at a police station in Madrid. Trying to accede, he left town in a fit of emotion and was unaware of any subsequent events involving Nancy. He suggested that someone might have attacked her when she returned to the apartment to gather her belongings. Carlos's version sounded far-fetched, especially after police found his fingerprints on the hatchet's packaging. In the following days, nearby wastelands, sewer systems, and the coastline were thoroughly searched with the help of divers, but no trace of Nancy was found. The police then decided to track all of Carlos' movements from August 20th to the 26th using his mobile phone signals. It turned out he had spent 3 days traveling along the coast and had also visited the cities of Bilbao and Burgos before heading to Madrid. It was clear that Carlos was trying to cover his tracks, but it seemed unlikely that he would travel around the country with a dismembered body, leading authorities to continue their search in Santander. Street surveillance footage showed that on the evening of August 20th, he walked toward a large natural forest park. He returned to the apartment late at night and then went out again, this time with a cart filled with oddly shaped bags. There were few cameras in the park itself, so once Carlos entered the wooded area, he disappeared and later reappeared with the same cart, which was now much lighter. He then headed toward the railway tracks, beyond which was a steep cliff overgrown with bushes. From there, he returned much lighter, giving law enforcement a clear indication of where to look for the body. Where is the child? It wasn't until September 16th that bags containing highly decomposed human remains were found in thick underbrush on the hillside. These remains were identified as those of the missing Nancy Gorseys, divided into 20 parts with a hatchet. According to security camera footage, everything Carlos transported in the cart was recovered, but something was still missing. Nancy, as we recall, was 4 months pregnant, yet her fetus was not found in any of the bags. The condition of the victim's genitals and lower abdomen showed merciless mutilation with a knife and hatchet, indicating that the perpetrator likely extracted the fetus and disposed of it separately from the mother's body. Carlos consistently denied his involvement, gave conflicting statements, and continued to try to shift the blame onto an unknown assailant. However, Traces of the victim's blood were found on his clothing and shoes, which he attempted but failed to completely wash off. Despite Bustamante's refusal to admit guilt, investigators were able to piece together the chain of tragic events and the full scenario of the crime. Forensic experts believe that on the afternoon of August 20th, following an argument, the man brutally beat and strangled his pregnant partner in the kitchen where traces of blood were found on the floor and walls. Carlos then moved Nancy's body to the bathroom and went shopping at a hardware store and the market. In the bathroom, he divided Nancy's body into 20 parts using a hatchet and a large kitchen knife, placed the pieces into bags, and loaded everything into a cart. He then went to the park looking for secluded places to dispose of the body. Late at night, he left the apartment with the cart and followed a pre-planned route deep into the park, scattering the bags in various locations, hoping they would never be found. Trial and sentence. The whereabouts of the fetus Carlos removed from Nancy's body remain unknown. He denied his guilt and claimed he loved her. From the time of the gruesome crime until his arrest in Madrid, Bustamante lived off the money he stole from Gorsi's, which he spent daily in bars across various cities. The investigation, the search for evidence and witnesses took law enforcement nearly 2 years, and the trial of the murderer did not begin until July 2022. In November of the same year, Carlos was found guilty of the premeditated brutal murder of Nancy and her unborn child, as well as the dismemberment and desecration of her body. However, many considered the sentence handed down to the murderer to be too lenient. Bustamante was sentenced to 25.5 years in prison, and he was also ordered to pay financial compensation of 150,000 euros to the parents and daughters of the deceased woman. The case of Shannon, Christian, and Christopher Newsom, the tragic end of 2 college students. Have you ever heard the saying that hesitation is akin to death? In our story today, this takes on a literal meaning as the negligent delay by police officers cost the lives of 2 young people. During the subsequent legal proceedings, it was repeatedly stated that the officers followed protocol and waited 24 hours from the time of the missing persons report. However, it was during these critical hours that the couple endured a tragic end under extreme cruelty. The case of Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom is cited as one of the most notorious and brutal in the history of the United States. It shook the nation twice. First in February 2007 when the crimes occurred, and later in 2011 when the sentences handed down to the gang members were challenged and appealed. This complicated legal battle led to the enactment of 2 laws. These laws restrict attorneys and defendants from casting the victims in a negative light and abolish the requirement for a jury's unanimous verdict to be approved by a judge. In this harrowing tale, there were 2 innocent victims and 5 merciless criminals, with the motive for the heinous act being a simple robbery. Let's delve into the details of this tragedy, piece together the chronology of those horrific events, understand the role of each participant, and explore whether this tragedy could have been avoided and the young lives saved. Who were Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom? Hugh Christopher Newsom Jr., commonly known as Chris, was born on September 21, 1983 in Knoxville, Tennessee, to Mary and Hugh Newsom in a loving, large family. As the youngest child, he was adored by his family. Chris was athletic in his youth, particularly excelling in baseball during his school years. His coach believed he had a bright future in the sport, but a severe injury and a prolonged recovery process ended his promising athletic career. Nevertheless, Chris was a man of many talents. He was an excellent artist, played guitar, had woodworking skills, and was knowledgeable about cars and motorcycles. Dreaming of becoming a mechanic in his youth, Chris's passion for carpentry eventually took precedence. After high school, he attended the prestigious University of Tennessee, where he was a diligent student and ranked among the top of his class. Shannon Christian was born on April 29, 1985 in the Cogdokes, Texas, the younger of 2 children to Dina and Gary Christian. She was raised alongside her older brother, Chase, with whom she shared a close and affectionate bond. Notably, Dina had been diagnosed with infertility in her youth, and the birth of her 2 children was considered nothing short of miraculous. In 1997, the Christian family moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, where the children attended local schools, and the parents established a small but profitable family business. Dina conducted individual psychotherapy sessions at home. Shannon, sharing her mother's interest in psychology, was outgoing and kind-hearted. After high school, she pursued a degree in sociology at the University of Tennessee and worked part-time to save for her dream of buying a car. Her parents and brother helped her realize this dream on her 20th birthday, contributing towards the purchase of a silver Toyota 4Runner. It was on the university campus in February 2006 that Christopher and Shannon met through mutual friends. She was just 21, and he was about to turn 23. It was love at first sight, and the couple became inseparable. Within a month, Chris introduced Shannon to his parents, expressing his desire to spend his future with her. Shannon reciprocated by introducing Chris to her family, who warmly welcomed him. In October 2006, a significant family dinner was held attended by both their parents and siblings. Discussions revolved around the young couple's deep feelings and their plans to marry after graduating from university. Everyone was happy and full of hope for the future, blissfully unaware of the tragedy that would soon befall their families. Vanished on the way to a party. On January 6, 2007, Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom were invited to a birthday party of a mutual friend. That Saturday, Shannon visited a beauty salon to prepare for the celebration, parking her car in a nearby underground garage where they planned to meet. However, Chris was delayed, leading to a slight argument between them as they were running late for the event. Their friends became increasingly worried when Shannon and Chris did not show up at the party. Known for their responsibility, it was unlike them to miss an event without notifying anyone. Attempts to reach them on their phones were unsuccessful. In desperation, Shannon's best friend repeatedly called her mother late into the night to check if everything was all right, but received no answer. The next morning, Dina, Shannon's mother, realized that her daughter had not come home. Initially, she was not overly concerned, assuming Shannon might have stayed over at Chris's place after the party. Besides, Shannon had a work shift on Sunday, so it was plausible she went straight to work from Chris's place. However, Dina's concern grew when she noticed several missed calls from an unknown number around midnight. Returning the call, she heard Shannon's friend's voice, informing her that Shannon and Chris had not shown up at the birthday party and were unreachable. This instilled fear in Dina, sensing that something terrible might have happened to her daughter and her boyfriend. Neither Shannon nor Chris was answering their phones, and Chris's parents were equally surprised, believing he was staying at Shannon's place. Further anxiety arose when it was discovered Shannon had not shown up for work either. The worried parents immediately contacted the police, but the response was lackluster. The officer suggested the couple might have simply sought some alone time and lost track of it. They also followed the protocol that an adult is considered missing only after 24 hours without contact. But for Shannon and Chris, those 24 hours were critical. Not willing to wait, the parents and friends of the young couple began their own search. They contacted everyone they knew, visited hospitals, distributed flyers with their photos, and set up social media groups appealing for any information about the missing students. Despite their efforts, no useful information surfaced. The last known sighting of Shannon was at the beauty salon she visited on Saturday. According to the hairstylist who attended her, Shannon only talked about the upcoming party and had no plans to stop anywhere else on the way, a gruesome discovery along the railroad tracks. It wasn't until Monday, January 8th, that the police finally began their search for the missing young couple, Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom. By this time, thanks to the efforts of their parents and friends, almost the entire city was aware of their disappearance. The day before, on Sunday, there were rumors about a horrifying discovery near the railroad tracks, but no concrete information was available. A railroad worker inspecting the tracks in his assigned area stumbled upon what appeared to be severely damaged human remains on the embankment alongside the tracks. The body was in a horrific state with multiple injuries and had been doused with a flammable liquid in an attempt to burn it. The police, responding to the scene, cordoned off the area and conducted a thorough examination. However, they were unable to find any significant clues or leads. After taking necessary photographs, the remains were sent to the morgue for an autopsy to determine the cause of death and to attempt identification, though it was clear that the extensive damage and effects of the fire would make this difficult. Forensic experts determined that the body belonged to a young man who had suffered a brutal death. The victim had multiple injuries inflicted while he was alive, indicating prolonged and severe assault. Almost all of his teeth had been knocked out or damaged by blows. He had been shot 3 times, twice in the back in a final fatal shot to the head. Additionally, traces of seminal fluid from at least 3 different men were found in his body, along with distinctive tears, suggesting repeated violent assaults. When police checked recent reports of missing young men, Christopher Newsome fit the description in age, height, and build. The officers contacted his parents and requested DNA samples for confirmation, but strongly advised against personal identification at the morgue as the burnt remains barely resembled human features. Unfortunately, the DNA analysis confirmed that the body belonged to the missing student, Newsome. The search for Shannon. Despite the distressing news about Christopher, Shannon Christian's parents still clung to the hope that their daughter was alive, possibly being held somewhere. Her mobile phone was last pinged on the day the couple disappeared in one of Knoxville's more troubled neighborhoods, a place they wouldn't have visited by choice. This indicated that they were likely brought there against their will, and Shannon might still be held in the area. In a secluded alley of this neighborhood, Shannon's Toyota 4Runner was found abandoned. It was in a terrible state, so much so that Dina and Gary Christian hardly recognized their daughter's car. The SUV was dirty, scratched, with broken headlights and deflated tires. All of Shannon's personal belongings were missing from the car, which was littered with cigarette butts, and the seats were torn and stained. The driver's seat was pushed far back, suggesting that a large adult male had been the last one to drive it. A crumpled envelope with the address 2316 Chipman Street was found on the floor between the seats, likely dropped by the perpetrator. A local witness reported seeing 4 African-American males driving the SUV that Saturday evening, a vehicle that stood out in that area. Fingerprints on the envelope led the police to Lamarcus Davidson, previously convicted for serious offenses. His residence, located in an industrial area near a wasteland, lacked witnesses. When no one responded to the police's knock and offer to surrender, they forced entry, hoping to find Shannon alive inside. Inside the house, they found Shannon's purse, a stuffed toy from her car, as well as Christopher's headphones and baseball cap, a knife with blood traces torn and blood-stained fragments of women's clothing, and Shannon's lifeless body were discovered in the house's trash chute system hidden under dirty sheets. She was bound in the fetal position and wrapped in 5 trash bags. Experts later concluded that she likely passed away in the early hours of Monday, January 8th. This tragic finding suggested that if the police had begun their search immediately after the missing persons report, rather than waiting for 24 hours, Shannon might have been saved. A horrific state of suffering. The condition of Shannon Christian's body was a horrifying sight even for seasoned forensic experts, as there was not a single untouched area on her. Shannon was covered from head to toe with bruises, abrasions, cuts, and cigarette burns. The numerous tears and injuries to her genital area, as well as her oral cavity and throat, indicated that she had been subjected to multiple assaults by several men. Shannon sustained a serious head injury and internal bleeding in the abdominal area, likely resulting from being kicked. Furthermore, the merciless assailants inflicted several penetrating, though not fatal, stab wounds on her and extinguished dozens of cigarettes on her skin. In a brutal attempt to destroy DNA evidence on her body, the perpetrators doused her with household bleach, paying particular attention to bleeding wounds and her genital area. She was also forcibly made to ingest bleach. After these torturous acts, Shannon, still alive, was wrapped in 5 trash bags and then shoved into a household trash chute covered with sheets and rags. She slowly suffocated and bled to death, helplessly trapped with no chance of escape or calling for help. 5 merciless perpetrators. Lamarcus Davidson, in whose house the mutilated body of Shannon Christian and personal belongings of the deceased Christopher Newsome were found, was immediately declared a fugitive. The police also tracked down another suspect, Eric Boyd, whose traces were found at the crime scene. Boyd was apprehended on January 11th without resistance and agreed to cooperate with the investigation, claiming he wouldn't go to prison for crimes he didn't commit. Boyd revealed that Davidson was hiding in a vacant house listed for sale and personally led the police to the location. Davidson, unprepared for this turn of events, was caught off guard and offered no resistance. Notably, at the time of his arrest, Davidson was wearing sneakers that had belonged to the deceased student. During interrogations, Davidson tried to minimize his role, portraying himself as a victim. He claimed that the couple had come to his house looking to buy banned substances, but were caught up in a conflict with his acquaintances. Davidson insisted that he left to avoid involvement, and the subsequent brutal acts occurred in his absence. Further interrogations revealed 3 more individuals involved in the case: Davidson's friend, George Thomas, his half-brother, Latalvis Cobbins, and an 18-year-old woman named Vanessa Lynn Coleman. Once all 5 suspects were in custody, they were placed in separate cells and interrogated individually. Each tried to deflect blame onto the others, inadvertently revealing details of the heinous crime. Their fragmented accounts helped piece together the event's chronology and each perpetrator's role in the brutal act, a timeline of tragic events. Lamarcus Davidson, who had been released from prison on parole just a few months before these events, was desperately in need of money. He was involved in the sale of banned substances and urgently required a vehicle to deliver these to his customers. Davidson decided to steal a car from an underground parking lot known for its lack of surveillance cameras and headed there with his accomplices. Tragically, at that moment, students Shannon and Christopher were in the parking lot arguing over Chris's delay. The criminals, deciding to leave no witnesses, forced the couple into the trunk of a car at gunpoint. The pair was taken to Davidson's house where they were brutally beaten and repeatedly assaulted. After midnight, a barefoot and undressed Christopher was again forced into the trunk and taken to the railroad tracks. He was ordered to walk on the stones before being shot twice in the back. His torment was ended with a final shot to the head. His body was then doused with a flammable liquid and set on fire in hopes of destroying any evidence that could lead to the perpetrators. Having dealt with Newsom, the criminals returned to the house where Shannon remained bound. She endured horrific cruelty the next day, leaving her without a single uninjured area on her body. The sadists concluded their torture by dousing her with bleach and packing her, still alive, into plastic trash bags, where she slowly suffocated. The exact moment when young Vanessa Coleman joined the group was unclear. During interrogations, she claimed to be a hostage herself, participating in the torture out of fear for her life. However, Boyd indicated that Coleman was Davidson's girlfriend and willingly participated in the events, even taking some of Shannon's jewelry and mobile phone. Further, a personal diary found at Vanessa's home contained her descriptions of the horrors at her boyfriend's house, which she referred to as an exciting adventure. The initial trials and sentences. During the investigation, it was established that Lamarcus Davidson, born in 1981, was the leader of the criminal group and the primary instigator of the brutal acts against the innocent victims. Davidson tried to deflect blame and downplay his role in the atrocities, attempting to shift responsibility onto the deceased themselves. Davidson claimed that the couple came to his house to buy banned substances and later suggested engaging in rough intimacy with him and his friends, a situation he said spiraled out of control. Remarkably, the defendant's lawyers latched on to this version, attempting to tarnish the reputations of the deceased in court. The parents of the victims later expressed immense emotional anguish over these claims. Nevertheless, Davidson was found guilty on 40 counts, including assault, kidnapping, robbery, and particularly cruel and premeditated termination of life, among others. The jury unanimously decided that Davidson deserved the death penalty for his heinous acts. Latalvis Cobbins, born in 1982, faced the death penalty for his role in the torture, assaults, and involvement in the termination of life. However, he was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. George Thomas, born in 1983, received a similar life sentence for his involvement in the same crimes with no chance of release. Eric Boyd, considering his cooperation with the investigation and assistance in capturing Davidson, was sentenced to 18 years of imprisonment. The relatives of both victims found this sentence outrageously lenient. As for Vanessa Coleman, born in 1988, the only female participant in the atrocities, the investigation proved her involvement in the torture, assaults, and in Shannon's tragic end. She was sentenced to 53 years in prison. Overturned verdicts and new hearings in 2011 while the criminals were serving their sentences and Davidson awaited execution. The case took an unexpected turn. The presiding judge resigned, admitting to a substance dependency. His ability to conduct trials was questioned, and his verdicts over the last 2 years were annulled, leading to new hearings, including the case of Christian and Newsom. A new judge scheduled hearings for all 5 individuals involved in the student's tragic end. After the retrials, Davidson's sentence remained unchanged: death penalty. Taubens continued to serve his life sentence without the possibility of parole. Thomas, however, received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 51 years. Vanessa Coleman's sentence was reduced from the original 53 years to 35 years. Her appeal in 2014 was rejected, and parole was denied in 2017. In 2020, the parole board decided she would remain incarcerated at least until April 2032. Eric Boyd's dramatically, originally receiving a relatively short sentence for cooperating with the investigation, his involvement in the assaults and tragic end of both victims was later proven. His retrial resulted in a life sentence without parole, with his accomplice, Thomas, testifying against him, revealing previously unknown details about Boyd's role. For his testimony, Thomas, who initially had the possibility of parole after 51 years, had his sentence reduced by 15%, contingent on good behavior. Boyd's attempts to appeal his new sentence were unsuccessful. He is currently serving his sentence in the Bledsoe County Correctional Complex. Davidson remains in the maximum security Riverbend institution awaiting the execution of his death sentence. Public reaction and the case's impact. As previously mentioned, this trial garnered significant attention widely covered in the press and leading to the enactment of 2 laws. The first was aimed at protecting victims from defamation, attempts to shift blame onto them, and portraying them negatively. This was in response to the defense strategy of the accused and their lawyers who tried to label the students as drug users and thrill seekers in a troubled neighborhood. These claims were completely false and caused immense pain and suffering to the victims' families. The second law eliminated the need for a judge's signature on a jury's unanimous verdict, which, if in place during this case, could have prevented the need for retrials and sentence reviews. The house at 2316 Chipman Street, which became a torture chamber for the young couple, was demolished in February. A memorial was erected on the site in honor of Shaman Christian and Christopher Newsom. In memory of Christian, a golf tournament and a Christian charity foundation were established, providing support to victims of violence. Similarly, a foundation in Newsom's name was created, holding annual memorial baseball tournaments at Halls Park and awarding a scholarship named after the deceased student and former baseball player. It's important to note that despite the public outcry and widespread attention, the media initially misrepresented details of the case, either accidentally or intentionally. Many believed that the variations in reporting and delayed coverage were influenced by racial motives as the victims were white and the perpetrators were African American. However, the head of the Association of Criminal Writers and Editors noted, "I can't confidently say that this case would have received more attention if 5 white criminals had been accused of committing similar atrocities against 2 black individuals." Additionally, the Knoxville police chief stated that there was no evidence to suggest these crimes were committed based on racial animosity. Kelly Clayton had everything going for her. First of all, she was quite smart and bright since high school. She was a role model for other students, active in school, excelled in tests, and passed exams just as well. At the same time, outwardly, she never looked like a girl who spent days and nights sitting over textbooks, cramming lessons, and writing out something from additional literature. No, on the contrary, her looks were considered model-like. And if her grades had left much to be desired, she could have built a modeling career. She could have, but she didn't. After high school, she went to teacher training university to become a chemistry teacher. The insane pride of her parents, but only for the first few years of university. It is not known what turning point happened to her then. But one day, Kelly took her documents from the institution and calling her parents, said that she no longer wanted to study, that she was too young to spend the rest of her life checking notebooks and raising ungrateful children. If she wants to, she will definitely return to her educational endeavors. In the meantime, she wants to travel and live life to her heart's content. Not the best idea, according to her parents, who were so upset that they didn't communicate with their daughter for 6 months. But perhaps if it wasn't for this desperate act, Kelly would never have met Tom Clayton. They met at a party of mutual friends, and the young man really liked the girl. Firstly, he, from the first minutes of acquaintance, began to court Kelly and show signs of attention. And secondly, Tom had a beautiful appearance and athletic physique, and all because the guy was a hockey star. For 4 consecutive seasons, he played for the semi-professional team Jackals. And in it, he was considered a strong man, a player who was able to break the opponent's ribs only if he did not approach the gate. But only a sports career, and especially built on strength and aggression, will someday fail. And Tom had to put the stick in the far corner and enjoy hockey only from the stands or from the couch watching his favorite team on the TV screen. The couple had to move on with their lives. And first, they returned to New York, where they got married, then moved to North Carolina, and then moved to the tiny town of Cato, numbering only a few thousand people. There, Tom franchised a company to rebuild houses after fires or disasters and worked in a related profession for a friend's company. As for Kelly, after dropping out of university, she worked as a waitress, only changing places, and now she had 2 children. However, Tom was earning well enough, and Kelly could quit her job at any time and take care of her beautiful daughters. But she still believed that extra money would never be superfluous. Besides, she could use it to blue toys for her children and spoil them in every possible way. On September 28, 2015, Tom, as usual, went to play poker with his friends, the Millers. He never took his wife to such events. Playing for money implied certain skills and experience in the game. Besides, someone had to stay at home with the children, and a family trip would have turned such gatherings into a noisy buffoonery and would not have brought any pleasure from gambling. That evening, Tom was not lucky in the game, but he did not get up from the table, but on the contrary tried to win back and offered anyone who wanted to stay to play until morning. But no one supported him, and he went home. At home, however, a terrible picture opened before him. His beloved wife was lying in her own pool of blood, badly beaten and, at first glance, was not breathing. Tom panicked and ran through the rooms looking for his children, and luckily, they were fine but very frightened. He grabbed his daughters and headed to his neighbor Derek's house, trying to make sure the children didn't see their mother's mutilated body. And already from the neighbor's house, he dialed the police number. The officer who arrived on the scene found Tom sitting on his knees in front of his wife's body, trying to give her artificial respiration. Only the EMTs were able to pull the man away, who voiced the terrible and unpleasant information. Kelly had been dead for a long time, and neither they nor he could do anything to help her. All 2 floors of the house were drenched in blood. A major mess was in the bedroom. Apparently, there had been a struggle between Kelly and the perpetrator who had committed his atrocity despite the fact that there were children in the house at the time. Kelly was pushed down the stairs, evidenced by the knocked-down banister, and beaten on the head with a blunt object until they were sure she was dead. There were no hints of knife or gunshot wounds. The policeman who filmed the crime scene noted to himself that Tom was shocked by what had happened and seemed lost in space. He walked from one corner of the room to another, entered the room for a split second, and immediately left it. And he could not tell the policeman where the children's room was, or where the emergency exit from the house was. But when asked where Tom himself was at the time of the murder, he answered calmly that he had been at a friend's house all evening where they were playing poker. Then the policeman, who did not get any clear information from Tom, went to the neighbors to ask some questions of the children. Tom's eldest daughter, Charlie, referred to the perpetrator as a robber. According to the words of the eldest daughter, she and her sister were almost asleep, but they heard their mother start screaming loudly from the next room. "Charlie, run. Run away from here." And then the whole place shook like an earthquake. The girls, after listening to their mother, cautiously went out of their room, but saw the criminal leaning over their mother and beating her with what appeared to them to be a hammer. The girls ran back into the nursery, closed the door with a small nightstand, and hid under the bed. It was a good thing. The criminal wasn't looking for them because that nightstand, as the policeman pointed out, was so small that it would hardly have apprehended a burglar. Say, what did this burglar look like? Well, he was a big one like a bear. That big? Wow. What was he wearing? Blue jeans and a black shirt. He was also wearing a mask, like the one Daddy wears when he goes hunting with Mr. Bourne to shoot ducks. So your daddy has a mask like that too. Will you show me? I'd have to ask him where it is. I don't know. What else did you notice when you saw the robber? He had eyes like Dad's, and I don't remember anything else. I saw him literally just a little bit, got scared, and we quickly ran back inside. Police officers checking the house were unable to confirm the girl's account that the perpetrator was a burglar. There were no signs of forced entry at either the front or back door. Although, on the other hand, the gate to the garage was open, and the perpetrator could have entered the house through the garage. Another thing that the police noted is that nothing was stolen from the house. Jewelry was left untouched lying in a jewelry box, and the safe where Tom kept the cash was not even touched. The doors of the cabinets in the house were also all closed. Usually, burglars check every little cabinet, every shelf, but here, the whole mess was the aftermath of a fight. Experienced officers, it would seem, understood everything at once. Tom pretends to be a heartbroken husband, and it was he who killed his beloved wife and the mother of his children in order to further receive insurance payments. If Kelly's life was insured and husband's murder, that's needed is to gather evidence and the case will be solved, especially since even her own daughter said that the mask on the robber was like her father's and eyes like her father. However, the police did not find the hunting mask in the house. After finding out where Tom had spent his time that night, the police questioned the other poker players. Is Tom the killer? Do you really suspect him? Wondered one of his friends. That poor guy had his wife murdered for crying out loud. And instead of looking for the bastard, you want to pin everything on him? How could you think of such a thing? No, Tom certainly couldn't have done it. I've known him a long time, replied another less emotional friend. He worked 2 jobs around the clock because he loved both Kelly and his kids. There's just no way that could happen. Plus, he was with us all night. We played poker, and even when everyone was tired, he kept insisting on continuing to play. Tom really was suspicious that evening, said his acquaintance Laura. During a break in the game, he took me into the next room and asked me to give him my phone to call his wife. He supposedly forgot his phone in the car and didn't want to go get it. I was first surprised that the car was 10 meters away from the house. Go to it and get the phone, but still gave him a call. He stepped back to make the call outside. I didn't hear who or what he was talking to, but when I decided to check the outgoing calls, there were no numbers in the call history, so he just deleted the call. Wouldn't you agree? That's odd. I told my husband about it, and he was as surprised as I was. My husband was sitting at the playing table next to Tom and noticed that Tom was not watching the process of dealing cards or watching the people around him, which is very important in poker, but was sitting with his head bowed over the surface of the table where the cards were hiding the screen of his phone. He had his phone on him. Why had he tricked me then? Where was he calling? Who couldn't he call from his phone? After Laura's testimony, the police once again questioned Charlie, Tom's daughter, and the girl repeated what she had told the policeman the first time. The robber looked a lot like her father. The next testimony was given by the niece of the murdered already after Tom was behind bars. I didn't tell Aunt Kelly. I just didn't want to upset her. She was very fond of Tom. She literally loved him. And besides, she has 2 children by him. They are my sisters. Who needs my truth? Tom was not the man he appeared to be at first glance. Yes, he occasionally spoiled my aunt with attention and flowers. He could easily babysit, which other fathers rarely do. But that was all at home. And at work, he was a completely different person. Kelly decided to help me one day and arranged for Tom to take me to work for him. She was too young to be on her own, so she understood me as well as anyone and wanted the best for me. I worked for Tom all last summer doing correspondence registration and document management. I didn't know him well before that, so at first we had a fictitious. He loves his daughters very much, but he doesn't care about his wife, and he hasn't had any feelings for her for a long time. He's even had a few affairs on the side during their marriage and even considered leaving Aunt Kelly. But he didn't simply because he was afraid that a divorce might leave him without a house and without money. Looking ahead, It is important to note that some of the interviewed female participants of that evening's poker game confirmed the words of Kelly's niece that Tom was not such a faithful husband and had a sexual relationship with 2 women who were also playing poker that night. In addition to the information about Tom's promiscuous life, Kelly's 16-year-old niece also told about another employee of Tom's firm, Michael Beard. Michael was doing repair work on houses after the fire, and he was doing a good job. But there was one moment in those houses where Bird worked, constantly missing things, and if the first few times Tom did not believe his customers, referring to the fact that during the fire the owners could lose something. Then when the accusations of theft began to be repeated for the 3rd and 4th time, there was no doubt. Michael Bird not only restores the floor and walls, but also steals. Plus, in addition to stealing, there were complaints that Michael was allowing himself to come to work drunk. I was in the office when Michael's stealing came to light. Tom could yell at his employee and kick him out on the street. He was upset with his subordinate's behavior like that. He kept asking him, "How could you? Or haven't you thought about your family? Where are you going to work now?" After the incident, Tom fired Bird, but still called companies he knew and offered them to hire his former employee. Tom recommended Michael, and when all his options were exhausted, Tom took Bird in to help with the household, cutting the grass, watering the plants, doing minor repairs around the house. The detective called Michael Beard in for questioning. He said he only stole because he and his family needed the money. Tom was very good to me, defended me to the end. But I know it was my own fault. He has a very good wife. She fed me when I worked for them, even though she really shouldn't have. She also gave my children clothes that her daughters had grown out of. I am very grateful for all they have done for me. I feel so bad for Kelly. When I heard about her death, I couldn't believe my ears. I felt so bad. I even went to church and prayed for her to go to the best of all worlds. The police did not find anything strange in Michael's story and let him go. But the interrogation of his wife, Mrs. Bird, made the police doubt his words. According to his wife, Holly, Tom offered Michael some work, which he did not say. And for this work, he promised to pay him $10,000. Now that was interesting. Michael was called back to the station and had a lie detector hooked up to him. All questions were failed. Bird was lying and therefore failed the test. Realizing he couldn't get away with it, he began to testify. Indeed, Tom promised Bird $10,000 if Michael, on the day when Tom will play poker, sneak into his house, kill his wife and set a fire in his house. The plan was to strangle Kelly and then make it look like she just burned to death in an accidental fire. Plus, the family home was insured for a very large sum of money. As the police checked, it was true. Kelly's home and life were insured at the highest rate. 2 cans of gasoline were waiting for Michael in the garage through which the house was to be entered. Everything was fine here. Bird entered the house when everyone was already asleep. He quietly began to climb the stairs and reach the bedroom where Kelly was supposed to be sleeping. But the young woman was either awake or awakened by the sound of the open door. And when she saw a strange man in the doorway, she began to scream in fright. Michael was just as frightened and pounced it on Kelly, trying to close his huge hands around her neck. But it wasn't that easy. Kelly began to fight back. I had no idea that a seemingly fragile Kelly had so much strength in her, says Michael. A heck of a fight ensued, which spilled over from the second-floor bedroom to the first-floor kitchen. Michael, because of the shock and panic, could not concentrate on the fight, but only waved his arms in all directions or just grabbed Kelly's clothes while Kelly, defending her life, aimed very accurately at Michael's face. And if the police had come to Bird earlier, they would have seen the marks from the beatings on him. But everything turned out as it did. After a long struggle, Michael hit Kelly's head against the wall with all his might. She fell, and for a while couldn't find the strength to get up. Michael took out a hammer and began hitting the young woman's head with it until she stopped showing signs of life. Michael, maddened by what had happened, just ran out of the house, even forgetting that Tom asked him not only to kill Kelly, but also to set the house on fire to cover up the crime. Michael had an accomplice, Mark Blandford, who, in fact, served only as a driver. The day before it happened, I got a call from Michael. I had worked with him on a construction site for a long time, and I had stayed with him for a couple weeks last year, so I knew him well. I knew Michael was into petty theft. So when he called me and asked me to drive while he broke into someone's house, I wasn't surprised. I wanted to turn him down, but he offered me $500. I thought long and hard at first, but he talked me into it. He said he just wanted to rob a businessman, and he needed help to get out of there before the cops got there. He said he'd help with the car. I gave in to his entreaties, but on the condition that I park somewhere far away from the house, he agreed. That evening, I waited for him in that car in a dark alley, and he came back quickly enough, breathing heavily and telling me to move as fast as possible. He didn't have any bag or sack on him, which didn't look much like a robbery. I didn't ask him any questions along the way, simply because I didn't want to know anything. I just wanted my $500, which, by the way, I didn't end up getting. On the way out, he asked me to stop at a bridge over a creek a couple blocks south of here. I stopped there. He hastily stripped off his outer garments and threw them off the bridge. If you need to be shown the place, I'll show you. Indeed, police officers who arrived on the scene at Mark's behest found parts of Michael's outer clothing near the creek, as well as the hammer used to kill Kelly. Michael, already in custody on suspicion of first-degree murder, began to change his testimony. According to him, he was indeed hired by Tom, indeed for $10,000, but only to commit arson at the house and nothing more. There was no question of murder. When he went into the house, however, Kelly was already dead. And who killed her? The detective asked. I think it was Tom. He offered me money for murder and arson from the beginning, but I refused the first offer. I'm not willing to kill a man for any money. He said I had nothing to fear, but he never could talk me into it. You may not believe me, but I almost lost my mind when I saw Kelly's body. I knew right then and there that he was setting me up, so I ran out of the house. He's the killer, Michael insisted. Michael spent a very long time assuring the police of his innocence, and all because he did not know that Mark had shown the place where Bird had thrown out his things and that his clothes as well as the murder weapon had already been submitted for examination. And the experts found both on his clothes and on the hammer the blood of Kelly Clayton. And that was the most direct proof that it was him who killed Kelly, not someone else. In turn, Tom also did not admit that it was he who ordered the massacre of his wife from a former problem employee of his company. According to him, Michael knew that he had money, knew that he was not poor, and because Bird lost his job as well as because of resentment associated with the dismissal, he decided to rob his house. But Kelly was at home that night, for which he paid with his life. It might have been difficult to prove Tom's guilt and his conspiracy with Michael if Laura, the woman who had been playing poker that night, had not told the police that Tom had called from her cell phone. The detective requested a transcript of her calls and expectations were confirmed. Then, on the night of September 28, 1929, Tom Clayton called Michael Beard. Michael was the first to go to trial. He continued to insist that he had been hired to set fire to the house in order to collect the insurance payout. He didn't kill Kelly, and as for the blood on his clothes, it was just because he was touching a dead and mutilated body. That's why he got dirty. He'd thrown his stuff away so no one would think he'd been at Clayton's house that night. His speech sounded convincing. The jury had been deliberating for 7 hours. In the end, they concluded that Michael Beard was guilty on all counts. He was facing life in prison. As for Tom, his lawyers were able to obtain records of conversations and correspondence between him and Michael, and none of the conversations clearly discussed their devious plan. The prosecution's requests for billing transcripts of his movements yielded no concrete results either. All the evidence was circumstantial. If it weren't for one nuance, the car in which Mark had given Michael a ride was registered to Tom's company. And Tom, coming to the office on his personal Toyota, left it in the parking lot, where for some reason moved to the company pickup truck, which later drove to Michael's house and left there and took back the day after the tragedy. That is, in fact, he gave Michael the car on which he and Mark went to the crime. It was this fact that was testified to at the trial by the jury. The trial lasted 6 days, and the jury concluded that Tom had hired Michael to commit this horrible crime after all. Michael, in turn, filed an appeal. In his defense, he used the words of little Charlie, who said that the eyes in the slit of the mask belonged to her father. However, the court rejected the appeal because the description of the clothes matched the one found under the bridge. As a result, Tom Clayton and Michael Beard received life sentences. As for Mark, he was charged with manslaughter, for which he received 4 years in prison. Tom and Kelly's children were given custody to Kelly's sister, Kim. After some time, Charlie has moved on from the tragedy. She occasionally remembers her mom, but absolutely won't talk about her father, who she will never see again. Lauren Ashley Burke was born December 30th, 1989 in Marietta, Georgia. Her parents, James Burke and Vivienne Gershond, later divorced. Lauren had a sister, Jacqueline Burke, and a brother, Chad Burke. After high school, Lauren went to Auburn University where she studied graphic design, was an active member of Delta Gamma sorority, played lacrosse, and was generally active in the campus community. Lauren was described by her friends as a well-liked, excellent student, always smiling, happy, and helpful. While still a high school student, Lauren started dating a guy named Sean McQuaid. After high school, they both enrolled at Auburn University where they continued their relationship. At this point in life, getting an education was a priority for both young people, but that didn't stop them from making plans for their future together. Unfortunately, however, not all of Lauren's plans and dreams were destined to come true. She started the morning of March 4th, 2008 by having breakfast at a cafe with her boyfriend, Sean. At 11 o'clock, Lauren went to class, after which she called her father, James, to discuss plans for the spring break and a visit to the dentist. After finishing her conversation with her father, she went to Sean's dorm where she stayed until the evening. At 8:30 p.m., she had an appointment with her classmate, Michael. They were to meet in the library and prepare a study assignment together. When Lauren, around 8 p.m., left Sean's room, it was already dark outside. Her car, a black February 2001 Honda Civic, was parked in the parking lot next to the dorm, and she moved towards it. That was the last time Sean saw Lauren. Michael, whom Lauren was supposed to meet at the library, started calling her cell phone after she didn't show up for her appointment, but Lauren didn't answer for some reason. He kept calling over and over, and finally he heard Lauren's voice on the other end. She said she wasn't coming to the library because she'd forgotten all about the appointment, and then she hung up. A little later, at about 9 p.m., 911 received a call about an injured girl who had been seen lying on the road between the Farmville Baptist Church and Route 280 on the 147 freeway. It was Lauren. Drivers stopped their cars in the roadway, blocking traffic in both directions. Lauren was lying on her back in the middle of the road taking slow, deep breaths. She was suffocating. There were many wounds on her body and only socks on her feet. At 9:12 p.m., the first police car arrived on the scene, at which point Lauren was already unconscious. A few minutes later, paramedics arrived, and as they loaded Lauren into the ambulance, her pulse was barely palpable. At 9:35 p.m., Lauren was taken to East Alabama Medical Center where doctors began trying to save her life. 8 minutes earlier at 9:27 p.m., 911 dispatchers received multiple reports of a car fire on the Auburn University campus. Firefighters and police were immediately sent to the address the callers gave. Unable to find the owner of the burning car among the crowd of curious students attracted by the fire from their dormitories, police checked the license plates and discovered that the owner of the car was someone named James Burke, a resident of Georgia. James Burke is Lauren's father. The police contacted James by phone and learned that the actual owner of the fire-ravaged Honda was his daughter, Lauren, who attends Auburn University. James immediately asked what was wrong with his daughter, but the police officers had nothing to say. They didn't know where Lauren was and told James that no one was in the burning car. After James talked to the police officer, he immediately started calling his daughter's cell phone, but she didn't answer, which only added to his anxiety. Unable to reach Lauren, James first called friends of his daughter that he knew, but none of them knew anything about her whereabouts or the car fire. He then called his ex-wife and Lauren's mother, Vivienne Gershond, hoping that maybe she knew where their daughter might be. Lauren's mother didn't know anything about what had happened either. At 9:40 p.m., Vivienne called her daughter's boyfriend, Sean. That's how Sean found out that Lauren was missing and that her car had been burned. Sean, calling mutual acquaintances of Lauren and trying to find out if anyone had seen her that evening, learned that she had canceled a meeting at the library saying she had forgotten about it. However, Sean knew for a fact that Lauren hadn't forgotten about her appointment for the evening, as when she left his room about 2 hours ago, she had planned to go straight to the library. While family and friends tried to figure out where Lauren had gone, doctors at East Alabama Medical Center were battling to keep her alive. Since Lauren was brought in unconscious and without any personal belongings or documents, the doctors did not know her name. Unfortunately, despite their best efforts, doctors were unable to save Lauren's life. She was pronounced dead about an hour after being admitted to the medical facility. The cause of her passing was a single bullet wound. The bullet, which had traveled out, had punctured both of Lauren's lungs. Experts concluded that the muzzle of the gun was only a few inches from Lauren's skin at the time of the shot. Police officers comparing the girl's passing at the hospital and the burned-out car on campus whose owner was missing quickly realized that the victim who could not be saved by doctors was Lauren Burke. The very next day, March 5, 2008, James Burke identified the body of his daughter after visiting from Atlanta. News of Lauren's passing quickly spread around campus. Auburn University released a statement about Lauren Burke's passing, urging students and staff to be extra cautious on and off campus, but assuring them that the campus is safe. Many of you and your parents have called and are understandably concerned. There is no indication of any additional danger to campus or student safety, the statement said. The Delta Gamma Society released a statement about what fraternity representatives called an unexpected and disturbing crime. The society urged sisters of the Auburn branch to cooperate fully with detectives while they sort out what happened. While Lauren's family and friends were grieving, police were trying to figure out who took her life, how the car fire was connected to it, and whether other students should be wary. Both the spot along the road where Lauren Burke was found in the area around her car were processed for evidence. We have put every resource we can into finding the person responsible for this crime, said Auburn Police spokesman Captain Tom Stouffer. Auburn, Alabama is a relatively quiet student community, and we take these things to heart. If someone gets hurt or dies, we all feel it, and we won't rest until we find the perpetrator. Stouffer also said that Alabama Governor Bob Riley offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to an arrest in Burke's case. Lauren's charred car was taken to the Auburn Police Department. Investigators from the State Forensic Laboratory and officers from the State Fire Chief's Office sifted through the remains of the car's burned interior. They found scraps of burned clothing, Lauren's melted digital camera, and the car owner's manual. A .38 caliber bullet was found under the front seat, which could mean the interior of the car was the scene of the crime, and the perpetrator had set it on fire to destroy the evidence. Detectives interviewed Lauren's family, friends, and boyfriend. None of them could name a single person who wanted to harm Lauren and was capable of doing so. Knowing that before her passing, Lauren was in a dorm at Sean's, the investigators searched his room, but nothing was found to link Sean to the crime. After speaking with Michael, whom Lauren was supposed to meet in the library, detectives learned that when Lauren answered his phone, he heard a noise similar to that of a moving car. At the same time, it emerged that someone had used Lauren's bank card several times shortly after she was found lying in the road. In all likelihood, the person who had Lauren's bank card was involved in her incident, and the police began looking for him. However, events soon took an unexpected turn. Less than 3 days after Lauren's passing at 9:55 a.m. on March 7, 2008, in the parking lot of the Walmart supermarket in Newnan, Georgia, about 75 miles from Auburn, a man of African descent attacked a 72-year-old woman as she was getting into her car. The attacker hit her on the head, threatened her, and told her to get in the passenger seat. He himself got into the driver's seat and tried to drive away from the parking lot, but noticed that an eyewitness to the attack was following him, talking to someone on the phone. The thought of the bystander calling the police prompted the perpetrator to return to the Walmart parking lot. He stopped and got out of the stolen vehicle, ran over to a nearby silver Chrysler Sebring, got in and fled the scene in a hurry. A few hours later, four officers chased the fleeing Chrysler at high speed toward Columbus, West Georgia. The driver did not respond in any way to stop, endangering other road users. During the chase, police observed the driver of the Chrysler throwing an object out the window. one of the chase crews stopped and searched for the object. Police officers found a .38 caliber revolver on the side of the road. Meanwhile, the chase continued. But at one point, the perpetrator's vehicle broke down and smoke billowed from under the hood. The driver stopped abruptly in the roadway and opened the door. Next, a police officer who was in pursuit on a motorcycle crashed into the open door. After the collision, the officer flew over the handlebars of the motorcycle and fell to the pavement, only fortunately not seriously injured. The road where the perpetrator stopped was through a forest, and it was into the woods that he rushed to flee. He could not escape, however. The police quickly caught up with him and snapped handcuffs on his wrists. Courtney Laro Lockheart was born on October 20th, 1984. In the words of his family, he was a nice, fun-loving guy until he joined the U.S. Army. He was sent to Iraq in February 2004, from which he returned as someone else in February 2005, according to his mother. He wasn't the Courtney I knew, his mother said. Courtney was a cheerful guy, but after he returned from Iraq, he never smiled again, never let anyone stand behind him, and sometimes hid in the closet or under the bed. In February 2006, Lockheart and his girlfriend, with whom he had by this time broken up, had a daughter. Also in February 2006, he was court-martialed for assaulting other soldiers using illegal substances and deserting his unit without permission. He spent 7 months in detention before being dishonorably discharged from the Army in December 2006. As February 2008 approached, Lockheart was said to have gone increasingly off the rails. He barely showered, stopped visiting his daughter, and was heavily addicted to illegal substances. Beginning in February 2008, he committed a string of burglaries, and with the exception of a convenience store robbery, his methods were always the same. He would approach the victim from behind as she was getting into her car in the parking lot, threaten her with a gun, demand that she give him her purse, and attempt to take possession of the car. One such crime ended taking the life of Lauren Burke. Lockhart's string of assaults stopped on March 7, 2008 after he attacked a 72-year-old woman and failed to evade a police chase. After his arrest, Courtney Lockheart, 23, was taken to the police station where he confessed that iPod and bank cards were found in his car. He gave a detailed account of the events of the day he kidnapped Lauren. It was Tuesday, March 4, 2008. Lockheart woke up in his silver Chrysler Sebring. He had spent the previous night in his car, not far from East Alabama Medical Center. He needed money, so he started driving around Auburn looking for another victim. It's worth noting that all the people he attacked were women, none of them men. His drive ended on the campus of Auburn University, where he parked next to the student dorms. He spent several hours sitting in his car watching the students. Around 8 p.m., he noticed some girl walk up to the car parked next to him and leisurely open the door. It was Lauren. Without thinking long, Lockheart grabbed his revolver and approached Lauren from behind. Poking her with the muzzle of his gun, he asked her how much money she had on her. When he didn't get an answer, he pushed Lauren into the car, into the front passenger seat, and got behind the wheel. According to Lockheart, Lauren said nothing but screamed in fear. When she finally calmed down, she pulled $200 from her purse, handed it to him, and begged him to leave. Instead of leaving, however, he ordered Lauren to take off her clothes. At gunpoint and hearing threats against her, Lauren complied, stripping off everything but a pair of socks. According to Lockheart, there was only one reason he made Lauren undress. He thought that if she had no clothes on, she would not want to escape. Lockheart then began to drive around the streets of Auburn. All the while, he was driving with one hand on the wheel and with the other holding Lauren at gunpoint. She tried to dissuade him from committing the crime, and when he said his life was over, Lauren promised to help him find a job. At some point, her phone started ringing. Lockheart told her to answer it and make something up so no one would suspect anything. It was a call from Michael, whom Lauren was supposed to meet at the library. When she answered, she said she had forgotten about the meeting and hung up right away. Lockheart said that they continued to drive through the streets of the city, and Lauren wouldn't give up trying to talk him into letting her go. She said she would help him overcome the difficulties he was facing. As they were driving down Highway 147, Lauren opened the door to jump out of the moving car, and at that point, Lockheart said he accidentally fired a shot. As we now know, the fired bullet pierced both of Lauren's lungs. Plus, she sustained injuries from the fall. She managed to wave to passing drivers before her strength failed her, and she lost consciousness. Lockheart told investigators that he parked outside the church and watched as cars began to stop next to Lauren lying on the pavement. Realizing that the police would be arriving any minute, he hurriedly fled. Planning to destroy the evidence he had left in the car, he drove to a gas station and bought a can of gasoline, which he paid for with Lauren's bank card. He doused the interior of the car with the gasoline he bought, then got in and drove to the campus where he abducted Lauren because his Chrysler was parked there. According to Lockheart, as he drove, he became dizzy from the gasoline fumes, so he rolled down the windows to let air in from the street. You might be wondering why he didn't drive to the campus first and douse Lawrence's car with gasoline there. Why did he drive on a powder keg, since a short circuit or spark could have caused the car to burn up with him? Perhaps it had something to do with Lockhart's mental problems or low IQ, but we shall talk about that a little later. Upon arriving on campus, Courtney took $46, an iPod, and her bank cards from Lauren's car before setting the car on fire and driving off in his Chrysler. He drove to a gas station where he paid for the gas with Lauren's money. He then returned to campus again to see if the car had burned all the way down. Investigators began to question whether all of Lockhart's testimony was true. They speculated that Lockheart had forced Lauren to undress, not so that she would not run away as he claimed, but for an entirely different purpose. But he could not get what he wanted because Lauren suddenly jumped out of the moving car. Also, the investigators doubted that Lockheart shot Lauren by accident. It seemed unlikely given the fact that Courtney had served in the army and knew well how to handle a gun. It seemed more logical that Lauren realized that Lockheart wasn't going to let her go and decided that her only chance of escape was to jump. She opened the door, and as she jumped out of the car and Lockheart shot her, ballistics testing confirmed that the bullet found in Lauren's car was fired from the gun Lockheart had thrown out the window as he tried to evade a police chase. In addition, experts ran tests and ruled out the possibility of an accidental discharge. The trigger had to be pulled hard enough to make the shot. Lauren's family and friends bid her farewell on March 9th. The same day, investigators interrogated Lockheart for the second time. The next day, he was formally charged multiple times in the Lauren Burke case. The trial began on November 8, 2010. Lockhart's attorneys claimed that their client had a mental illness because of his military service and that the shooting of Lauren was accidental. According to court documents, Lockheart pleaded not guilty by reason of mental defect or insanity. The court was presented with the testimony of a psychologist who testified that Lockheart had an immature and not thinking straight. Although the state attempted to introduce evidence of Lockhart's other crimes and his dishonorable conduct in the military, the trial judge excluded that evidence. After the guilt phase of trial, the sentencing phase immediately followed. Lockheart presented witness testimony and evidence in an attempt to cast himself as a war hero who was mentally disturbed by combat and the death of his commanding officer. The jury rendered a special verdict in which an additional aggravating factor was the taking of a person's life in the course of the kidnapping. The jury voted 12 to recommend a sentence of life without parole. The trial judge later disagreed with the jury's advisory sentence and sentenced Lockheart to death. In a 28-page sentencing order, the judge explained why he disagreed with the jury's opinion. He concluded that the kidnapping weighed heavily in favor of the death penalty. The victim was alone, unarmed, and she was chosen by Lockheart at random. The kidnapping is even more egregious because she was taken from a college campus, a place where students should feel safe, and forced into her own car. Lockheart forced her to undress and held her at gunpoint in order to prevent her escape. The court also emphasized that the jury was unaware of Lockhart's crime spree and the true nature of Lockhart's military service. Although the jury heard testimony regarding Lockhart's service, the jury was unaware of the full extent of Lockhart's military disciplinary record, wrote the judge. The court reasoned that had the jury been aware of the additional facts known to the court, their sentencing recommendation would likely have differed. 15 years have passed since Lauren's death, and Lockheart is still on death row in Alabama and has not given up trying to appeal his sentence. After his conviction and death sentence, he appealed to an Alabama court, which upheld the sentence in August 2013. In April 2014, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals denied Lockhart's request for a retrial. He then appealed to the Supreme Court of Alabama. But in September 2014, his motion was again denied. In January 2015, Lockhart appealed to the Supreme Court of the United States. In April of that year, the Supreme Court of the United States denied his petition. In 2018, Lockhart made another attempt to challenge the sentence. Lawyers from a human rights organization who represented him tried to convince the court that the lawyers defending Lockhart in 2010 had mishandled the case. Although there were some flaws in Lockhart's 2010 defense, it ultimately did not change the outcome, with the death sentence being upheld again. In April 2021, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals upheld Lockhart's death sentence. Lauren's parents said they would never give up and would do everything in their power to keep Lockhart's death sentence from being overturned. Courtney Lockhart gave my daughter the death penalty. There's no reason why he shouldn't have the death penalty. That's all I have to say, Burke's father, Jim, said. He didn't give her a second chance. He shouldn't get a second chance either, Lauren's mother, Vivian, said. As of today, Courtney Lockhart remains on death row in Alabama. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.